The morning sun catches the blade of Ayana's knife as she kneels beside the wounded cavalry horse, its labored breathing echoing across the canyon like thunder before a storm. Blood seeps through her fingers as she presses healing herbs against the animal's flank, knowing that saving this horse could cost her everything: her family's trust, her people's safety, perhaps even her life. The animal's eyes, wide with pain and fear, mirror her own as voices echo from the ridge above, speaking words she recognizes as English, the language of those her father has sworn to drive from their ancestral lands. In 3 days, when the moon turns full, 2 armies will meet in these very canyons, and the girl pressing healing mud into a cavalry mount's wounds is the daughter of the Apache war chief, who has promised to paint the desert red with soldiers' blood. Yet, as the horse's breathing steadies beneath her touch, Ayana feels something stirring in her chest, a dangerous hope that perhaps there might be another way to end this war than with the death songs her people have been practicing for weeks. The knife trembles in her hand not from fear, but from the terrible weight of possibility. 20-year-old Ayana moves through the pre-dawn darkness like water flowing around stone, her moccasined feet finding purchase on rock faces that would challenge a mountain goat. Her black hair, braided with strips of soft deer hide and small turquoise beads that catch starlight, falls to her waist in a way that speaks of both tradition and the careful attention of a mother who may never braid it again. Her hands, stained with plant dyes from yesterday's healing work, carry the calluses of someone who has ground corn, woven baskets, and learned to read the language written in every bent grass blade and disturbed pebble, across 50 miles of high desert country. 6 months ago, her brother Nile Nish fell to cavalry bullets during a raid on a supply wagon, his body brought home wrapped in the same red blanket their grandmother had woven for his wedding ceremony. Since that day, Ayana has watched her father, Chief Manuelito, transform from a leader who sought peaceful solutions into a man whose dreams speak only of revenge. The laughter has died in their family's wickiup, replaced by the constant sound of weapons being sharpened and war paint being prepared. She carries her brother's hunting knife now, the bone handle worn smooth by his grip, and sometimes she catches herself speaking aloud to him as she tends the medicinal plants that grow in hidden springs throughout these canyons. Nile Nish had always believed that strength came not from the ability to kill, but from the wisdom to know when killing was truly necessary. It's a lesson that sets her apart from many in her band, who see her reluctance to celebrate the coming battle as weakness rather than wisdom. Her position as the chief's daughter grants her privileges that other young women lack: the freedom to ride alone, to gather plants in dangerous areas, to speak her mind in council meetings. But it also places expectations on her shoulders that sometimes feel heavier than the water jars she carries up from the hidden springs. She is expected to be the perfect Apache woman, fierce in defense of her people, skilled in all the traditional arts, ready to become the wife of a strong warrior who will help lead their people through the dark times ahead. Yet, as she kneels beside the wounded horse in this hidden canyon, pressing her ear to its chest to count the heartbeats, she wonders if being the perfect Apache woman means she must choose hatred over the healing gifts her grandmother taught her. The animal's trust, freely given despite the scent of wood smoke and sage that marks her as Apache, challenges everything she has been told about the unbridgeable gulf between her people and the blue-coated soldiers. The desert around their hidden village reflects the tension building in every human heart. Saguaro cacti stand like ancient sentinels, their arms raised in gestures that could be surrender or defiance. The mountains, purple in the distance, seem to lean inward as if trying to contain the violence that everyone knows is coming. Even the animals sense the change. Rabbits venture out only in the deepest darkness, and the mourning doves have gone silent. Water has become scarce in the traditional gathering places, forcing longer and more dangerous journeys to hidden springs known only to a few elders. Cavalry has been poisoning wells and burning traditional food sources, a strategy that Ayana's father calls dishonorable warfare against women and children. But when she watches her baby cousin grow thin from hunger, she understands why the War Council voted unanimously for the full moon attack that will either drive the soldiers away forever or cost them everything. The rhythm of daily life has changed too. Women now grind corn in shifts so that warriors can always be ready to ride out at a moment's notice. Children play games that sound too much like battle plans. Elders spend their time crafting extra arrows and treating hide for war shields instead of telling the winter stories that normally fill the long evenings. Through it all, Ayana continues her work as a healer, gathering the plants and minerals that can mend broken bones, ease fever, and help the wounded find rest. It's work her grandmother began teaching her before she could walk properly, and work that connects her to generations of women who understood that creating life was more challenging and more valuable than taking it. But as she stands now over this injured cavalry horse, its breathing finally steady under her care, she hears the sound of approaching hoofbeats and voices speaking English with what sounds like concern rather than anger. Her hand moves instinctively to her brother's knife, but something makes her stay beside the wounded animal instead of melting back into the rocks, where she could disappear as completely as morning mist. Perhaps it's the thought of Nalnish, who always said that courage meant doing what was right even when it might cost you everything. Perhaps it's the simple fact that she has just spent an hour saving a life, and she's not ready to hide from the consequences of that choice. Or perhaps it's something else entirely, a recognition that some moments arrive in life when you must choose between the path that others have laid out for you and the path that your own heart knows is true. The hoofbeats grow closer, and through the pre-dawn shadows, she can make out the silhouette of a single rider approaching the canyon where she kneels beside his horse. Lieutenant James Morrison feels his world shifting beneath him like sand in a windstorm as he rounds the canyon bend and sees the Apache woman kneeling beside his missing mount. For 3 hours he has been tracking Dakota through these treacherous canyons, knowing that losing his father's warhorse could cost him his commission, and possibly his life if Dakota had fallen into the hands of raiders who might torture the animal for sport. Instead, he finds a scene that challenges everything he has been taught about the Apache people he has been ordered to subdue. The woman's hands move with practiced skill across Dakota's injured flank, applying what appears to be some kind of herbal treatment. The horse, who normally shies away from strangers, stands calm and trusting under her touch. Steam rises from a small clay pot beside her, suggesting she has been working here for some time, and the careful way she has positioned herself to shelter Dakota from the night wind speaks of someone who understands horses as partners rather than tools. James sits frozen in his saddle atop a small rise, his hand resting on his service revolver, not from any intention to use it, but because 3 months of patrol duty in Apache country has trained him to never let his guard down. Yet as he watches this woman-girl, it's difficult to tell her age in the starlight, tend to his horse with the same gentle attention he has seen his own mother give to injured barn cats, he feels something fundamental shifting in his understanding of the enemy he has been sent here to fight. At 22, James carries the weight of being the youngest officer in his regiment, as well as the burden of a father whose legendary cavalry career casts shadows that James doubts he will ever be able to fill. Colonel William Morrison's name is spoken with respect in every military fort from Texas to California, and his expectations for his son have never included the kind of doubts that keep James awake during the long night watches. 3 weeks ago, James received orders that still sit in his jacket pocket like a lead weight. Lead a reconnaissance mission to map Apache strongholds in preparation for a major offensive that will clear this entire territory of hostile elements. The words are clean and professional on paper, but James has seen enough of the aftermath of cavalry charges to understand that clearing hostile elements means women and children as well as warriors. He joined the cavalry to serve his country and follow in his father's footsteps, but the reality of frontier warfare bears little resemblance to the heroic stories of his childhood. Too many of the engagements he has witnessed have been less about military honor and more about anger, fear, and the terrible momentum that builds when men convince themselves that their enemies are less than human. Yet the scene before him, this Apache woman saving his horse's life in the dark hours before dawn, refuses to fit into any of the categories his training has provided. If she had wanted to harm Dakota, she could have killed him and disappeared hours ago. Instead, she has spent her night in an act of mercy that serves no strategic purpose and carries enormous personal risk. James recognizes the herbs she is using from his own frontier medical training. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, and what appears to be clay mixed with something that smells faintly of pine. These are sophisticated treatments that suggest extensive knowledge of healing arts, knowledge that takes years to acquire and wisdom to apply correctly. The woman looks up suddenly, her dark eyes meeting his across 30 yards of canyon floor, and James feels the moment crystallize into something that will change the direction of his life. She doesn't run, she doesn't reach for the knife he can see at her waist. Instead, she continues her work on Dakota's wound while watching him with an expression that seems to be asking a question he doesn't yet know how to answer. In the growing light, he can see that she is young, probably close to his own age, with the kind of natural grace that comes from a lifetime of moving through difficult terrain. Her clothes are well made but practical, buckskin pants and tunic decorated with beadwork that catches the early light like captured stars. Everything about her speaks of competence, intelligence, and a confidence that comes from knowing exactly who she is and what she's capable of. James makes a decision that feels both completely natural and utterly terrifying. He dismounts slowly, keeping his hands visible and away from his weapons, and begins walking down into the canyon toward the woman who is saving his horse's life. As his boots crunch on the rocky ground, he tries to remember the few Apache words he has learned from scouts and traders. The woman watches his approach with alert but not frightened eyes, her hands never pausing in their work. When he reaches a distance that feels respectful but close enough for conversation, James stops and attempts what he hopes is a properly pronounced "thank you" in her language. The words come out awkward and uncertain, his pronunciation undoubtedly terrible, but the woman's eyes show the first hint of surprise she has displayed since his arrival. She responds with a phrase in Apache that sounds like a question, and James realizes they have just stepped into territory that no military manual has prepared him for. He gestures toward Dakota, and then toward her, placing his hand over his heart in what he hopes is a universal gesture of gratitude. Then, feeling somewhat foolish, but knowing that this moment requires something more than military protocol, he says his name clearly, James. The woman considers this for a long moment, her dark eyes studying his face as if trying to read something written there. Then, in accented but clear English, she says, "Your horse will live, but you should not be here." Her voice carries the kind of quiet authority that James recognizes from his father's best officers, people who don't need to raise their voices to command attention. But there's something else in her tone, something that sounds almost like warning rather than threat. "I know," James replies, and the honesty in his own voice surprises him. "But I couldn't leave him." The woman nods, a gesture that suggests she understands something about loyalty and the bonds between living things. She returns her attention to Dakota's wound, but James senses that she is also listening for sounds from the surrounding canyons, sounds that might indicate they are no longer alone. "What's your name?" James asks quietly, settling into a crouch that brings him closer to her level without seeming threatening. Again the long consideration, as if she is weighing risks and possibilities that James can only guess at. Finally, she says, "Ayana." It means forever flowering. "Ayana," James repeats, trying to pronounce it with the same musical quality she gave it. "That's beautiful." She looks up at him then, and James sees something flicker across her face, surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "You are not what I expected," she says. "Neither are you," James admits, and realizes that they have just crossed some invisible boundary into territory that neither of their peoples would approve of. As if summoned by that thought, the sound of distant voices drifts down from the canyon rim, voices speaking Apache in urgent, searching tones. Ayana's head snaps up, her body tensing like a deer that has caught the scent of wolves. "My cousins," she says quietly. "They will be looking for me soon." James understands that their time in this strange sanctuary is ending, but something in him rebels against simply mounting Dakota and riding away as if this encounter never happened. "Will I see you again?" he asks, the words emerging before he can consider their wisdom. Ayana looks at him for a long moment, and James sees a conflict playing out behind her dark eyes, duty warring against something else, something that has been awakened by their shared concern for a wounded horse, and a few words spoken in honesty rather than hostility. "The war is coming," she says finally. "My father leads the warriors. Your people, they will not be welcome in these canyons much longer." "I know," James says again, but this time the words carry a weight that neither of them can ignore. "But maybe," he trails off, unable to finish the thought, unsure what he is even hoping for. Ayana seems to understand anyway. "Maybe," she agrees quietly, and the single word hangs in the air between them like a prayer offered to an uncertain deity. The voices from above grow closer, and Ayana begins gathering her healing supplies with practiced efficiency. Dakota, seeming to sense that his treatment is ending, nuzzles her shoulder gently in what appears to be a gesture of thanks. "Go," Ayana tells James, her voice carrying new urgency. "Follow the canyon east until you reach the red rocks, then south to your fort. Do not come back here." But as James prepares to mount Dakota, she adds something that stops him cold. Unless what?" Ayana looks toward the canyon rim, calculating time and distance. "There is a place where the three arroyos meet, marked by a single cottonwood tree. If you ever need to find me, if there is ever a reason." She doesn't finish the sentence, but James nods to show he understands. As he swings into the saddle, Dakota moving easily, despite his bandaged wound, he looks down at the Apache woman who has just changed the trajectory of his life. "Thank you," he says again, this time in English, putting all the sincerity he can manage into the simple words. "Vaya con Dios," Ayana replies, using the Spanish phrase that serves as common language between many of the Southwest's diverse peoples. "Go with God." As James guides Dakota up the Eastern Trail, he realizes that for the first time since arriving in Apache country, he has met someone who treated him not as an enemy or a threat, but simply as another human being capable of caring about the suffering of an injured animal. It's a recognition that will haunt his dreams and challenge every order he receives in the days to come. Behind him, Ayana watches until horse and rider disappear around the canyon bend, then quickly erases all traces of her healing work before melting back into the rocks just moments before her cousins arrive to escort her home. Neither of them knows that this encounter has set in motion events that will test everything they believe about loyalty, duty, and the possibility of love blooming in the shadow of war. The news travels through Fort Davidson like wildfire through dry grass. Apache war parties have been spotted gathering in the high country, and scouts report smoke signals coordinating movements across a 100-mile front. Colonel Morrison calls an emergency staff meeting, and James finds himself sitting in a room full of career soldiers whose enthusiasm for the coming battle makes his stomach clench with foreboding. "Gentlemen," the colonel announces, his weathered face showing the satisfaction of a man who has waited months for this moment, "we finally have the excuse we need to solve the Apache problem permanently. Intelligence suggests they're planning a major attack, which gives us full authority to strike first and strike hard." James watches his fellow officers lean forward with interest as his father spreads maps across the table, marking suspected Apache camps with red pins that look disturbingly like drops of blood. Captain Williams, a man whose hatred for all native peoples is well known throughout the regiment, speaks first. "About time, sir. These savages have been raiding and killing for too long. What are our orders?" "Total pacification," Colonel Morrison replies, and James feels the words hit him like physical blows. "We'll coordinate with 3 other regiments to sweep the entire territory. Any Apache found outside designated reservation boundaries will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly." The phrase "dealt with accordingly" hangs in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, and James finds himself thinking about dark eyes and gentle hands treating a wounded horse. He forces himself to speak, his voice steadier than he feels. "Father, Colonel, what about non-combatants? Women and children?" Several officers turn to look at him with expressions ranging from surprise to disapproval. Colonel Morrison's face hardens slightly as he answers his son. "Lieutenant Morrison, the Apache don't distinguish between soldiers and civilians when they raid our settlements. Women and children in war parties are as dangerous as the warriors themselves. We'll offer safe passage to reservation boundaries, but anyone who refuses," he leaves the sentence unfinished, but the implication is clear. James feels something cold settling in his chest as he realizes that the woman who saved Dakota's life, Ayana, is almost certainly among the people his father is planning to pacify. "Sir," James tries again, "perhaps if we attempted negotiation first." "Negotiation?" Captain Williams interrupts with a bark of laughter. "Lieutenant, you've been on the frontier long enough to know that the only thing these people understand is superior force. They chose war when they started gathering for this attack." James wants to point out that the Apache might see the gathering as defensive rather than offensive, that they might be responding to months of pressure and provocation, but he knows such arguments will only mark him as weak in the eyes of his fellow officers. Instead, he asks the question that has been haunting him since his meeting with Ayana. "What intelligence do we have about Apache intentions? Are we certain they plan to attack first?" Colonel Morrison gives his son a sharp look. "Lieutenant, are you questioning the military wisdom of preventive action?" The room falls silent, and James realizes he has stepped into dangerous territory. To challenge the decision now would be tantamount to insubordination, possibly even cowardice in the eyes of men whose entire careers are built on their willingness to fight. "No, sir," James says carefully. "I'm simply trying to understand the tactical situation." But as the meeting continues, with officers discussing cavalry charges and artillery placements and the best strategies for flushing out Apache strongholds, James finds his thoughts returning again and again to a hidden canyon and a woman whose first instinct was to heal rather than harm. That evening, as James sits alone in his quarters trying to reconcile his duty as a soldier with the growing certainty that the coming campaign will destroy something precious and irreplaceable, he receives an unexpected visitor. Sergeant Martinez, an older Mexican-American soldier who has served as the regiment's chief scout for over a decade, knocks quietly on James's door. "Permission to speak freely, Lieutenant?" Martinez asks, his weathered face serious. "Granted, Sergeant. What's on your mind?" Martinez closes the door behind him and speaks in the low tones of a man sharing dangerous secrets. "Sir, I've been scouting these canyons for 12 years, and I know the Apache people as well as any outsider can. This gathering they're planning, it's not what the colonel thinks it is." James feels his pulse quicken. "What do you mean?" "They're not massing for attack, sir. They're preparing for defense. All the signs point to a people getting ready to make a last stand to protect their families. The warriors we've been tracking are moving women and children to hidden strongholds, not positioning them for raids." The sergeant's words confirm James's worst fears. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be without sitting in on their war council. Lieutenant, if we attack first, we'll be slaughtering people who are only trying to protect their homes." James stares out the window toward the dark mountains, where he knows Ayanna is probably sleeping in her family's camp, unaware that cavalry units are already preparing to surround her people's hiding places. "What do you think we should do, Sergeant?" Martinez shakes his head slowly. "That's above my pay grade, sir. But I thought someone in the officer corps should know the truth, before we start something that can't be taken back." After the sergeant leaves, James sits alone with the terrible weight of knowledge. He thinks about his father's expectations, his own career prospects, and the oaths he swore when he accepted his commission. But he also thinks about gentle hands healing a wounded horse and a voice saying, "Go with God," in the pre-dawn darkness. By morning, he has made a decision that will either save lives or destroy his future. The decision crystallizes when James realizes that if he does nothing, the woman who saved Dakota will likely die in the massacre his father is planning. The thought of Ayanna's body lying broken in some remote canyon, her healing hands stilled forever, creates a physical pain in his chest that threatens to stop his breathing entirely. He knows the meeting place she described, 3 arroyos converging near a solitary cottonwood tree. He has seen it during patrol sweeps, a natural landmark that stands out against the red rock landscape like a beacon. If he can find her there, warn her of the coming attack, perhaps he can save at least one life from the slaughter that military necessity demands. But as James prepares to violate every oath he has sworn as an officer, he understands that he is crossing a line from which there may be no return. Warning the enemy of military plans is treason by any definition, punishable by court-martial and possible execution. Yet the alternative, staying silent while innocents die, feels like a betrayal of something even more fundamental than military honor. The next evening, as his regiment prepares for the dawn advance that will launch the final campaign against the Apache, James slips out of the fort under cover of darkness and rides toward the cottonwood tree, where he hopes to find the woman who has become the embodiment of everything worth preserving in a world bent on destruction. Meanwhile, in the hidden canyon village, where her people have gathered for what they know may be their final stand, Ayanna kneels beside her grandmother's bedside and listens to words that will haunt her for the rest of her life. "Granddaughter," the old woman whispers, her voice barely audible above the wind that moves through the canyon like the breath of restless spirits, "I have seen the signs in the smoke and the flight of birds. The blue soldiers come with the dawn, and many of us will not see another sunset." Ayanna's hands still over the blanket she has been weaving, her fingers suddenly unable to continue the pattern that has occupied her nervous energy for hours. "Grandmother, surely Father's warriors can defend us. We have chosen our ground carefully." "And child," the old woman interrupts gently, "courage and good ground cannot turn aside the thunder weapons the soldiers bring. But there may be another path, if you have the strength to walk it." The words send a chill down Ayanna's spine that has nothing to do with the cool mountain air. "What do you mean?" Her grandmother reaches out with hands that have grown thin as paper, but still carry the warmth of unconditional love. "You spoke of the soldier boy who helped heal the horse. Is he a good man?" Ayanna feels heat rise in her cheeks as she realizes that her grandmother, who notices everything, has somehow divined the secret she thought she had hidden perfectly. Yes, I believe he is." "Then perhaps the spirits have given us one last chance to choose wisdom over war." The old woman's eyes, clouded with age but still sharp with intelligence, fix on Ayana's face with an intensity that makes denial impossible. Tomorrow, when the fighting begins, someone must carry word to the soldier chiefs that we have children here, innocent ones who have never raised a hand against any white man. Someone must speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. Ayana feels the weight of what her grandmother is suggesting settle on her shoulders like a mountain. You want me to approach the cavalry during battle? I want you to do what your heart knows is right, child. The same heart that chose to heal instead of harm, even when the wounded creature belonged to those we call enemies. As if summoned by her grandmother's words, the sound of running footsteps echoes through the canyon. Ayana's cousin Taco appears at the entrance to the family's wickiup, his young face tight with fear and excitement. Ayana, your father calls for you. The scouts have returned with news. Ayana kisses her grandmother's forehead and follows Taco through the narrow paths between family shelters to the central fire, where Chief Manuelito stands surrounded by his war council. The flames cast dancing shadows across faces painted for battle, and the sight sends ice through Ayana's veins. Her father looks up as she approaches, his expression softening slightly at the sight of his daughter. Ayana, the scouts report that the soldiers move tonight. By dawn they will have us surrounded. How many, father? She asks, though she dreads the answer. Too many, Manuelito replies simply. But we knew this day would come. We have prepared as well as we can. Around the fire, war leaders nod grimly. These are men who have fought cavalry before, men who understand exactly what tomorrow's battle will cost. Yet Ayana sees no despair in their faces, only the calm resolution of people who have chosen to die on their feet rather than live on their knees. There is still time to send the women and children deeper into the mountains, suggests Naish, one of her father's most trusted lieutenants. Manuelito shakes his head. The soldiers have planned well. They know our escape routes. Any who run now will be hunted down in open country, where we cannot protect them. He looks at his daughter with eyes full of love and regret. We make our stand here together, and pray that our deaths will mean something to those who come after. Ayana feels the moment crystallizing around her like ice forming on still water. In a few hours, these good men, her father, her cousins, her childhood friends, will ride out to die fighting an enemy that outnumbers them 10-1. Their wives and mothers and children will wait in the hidden canyon, hoping for a miracle that everyone knows will not come, unless she chooses to create one. Father, she says quietly, what if there were another way? The conversation around the fire stops as every face turns toward her. Manuelito's expression shows surprise. It is not traditional for women to speak in war council, even daughters of chiefs. Another way? He asks gently. Ayana takes a breath that feels like jumping off a cliff. What if someone could speak to the soldier chiefs? Explain that we have children here, innocent ones. Perhaps, daughter, Manuelito interrupts, his voice heavy with sadness. The soldiers do not see our children as innocent. To them, we are all enemies to be destroyed. But what if they could be made to see differently? What if someone went to them under a white flag, as the white men do when they wish to talk rather than fight? Naish snorts with derision. They would shoot any of us on sight, flag or no flag. Not necessarily, Ayana says, her voice growing stronger as the desperate plan takes shape in her mind. If someone went who had helped them before, who had proven that not all Apaches seek their destruction, understanding dawns in her father's eyes, followed immediately by alarm. Ayana, no. You cannot be thinking, Father, I once helped heal a cavalry horse. The soldier was grateful, and he seemed different from what we have been told to expect. If I could find him, speak to him. The war council erupts in angry voices. Several warriors speak at once about the foolishness of trusting any white man, the certain death that would await any Apache who approached a cavalry camp, the impossibility of preventing a battle that both sides have already committed to fighting. But Chief Manuelito raises his hand for silence, his eyes never leaving his daughter's face. You believe this soldier would listen, would protect you long enough to speak? Ayana thinks of dark blue eyes in a dawn-lit canyon, of gentle hands and careful words, of a voice saying her name like a prayer. I believe he is a man of honor, Father, and I believe that sometimes a single voice, speaking truth, can change the direction of history. The silence that follows feels like the pause between lightning and thunder. Finally, Manuelito speaks, his voice heavy with the weight of a father's love and a leader's terrible responsibility. If you go, and if they kill you, it will change nothing except to rob me of my daughter before the battle even begins. And if I stay, and everyone dies tomorrow, including the children who have never harmed anyone, then what have we preserved except our pride? Around the fire, weathered warriors exchange glances that speak of battles fought and comrades lost, of a way of life being ground to dust beneath the wheels of an unstoppable machine called progress. Some shake their heads in denial, but others nod slowly, as if recognizing the terrible logic in what the chief's daughter proposes. There is wisdom in unexpected places, says Cochise, the eldest of the war leaders and a man whose counsel Manuelito has always valued. Perhaps the spirits speak through this girl. Perhaps they offer us one last chance to choose a different ending to our story. Manuelito looks around the circle of faces, reading in them the same desperate hope that he feels stirring in his own chest despite his better judgment. These are proud men, fierce warriors who have never retreated from any fight. But they are also fathers and grandfathers, and the thought of their children dying for the failures of adults is a burden almost too heavy to bear. If you go, he says finally to his daughter, you go knowing that you carry the lives of everyone in this canyon. If you fail, if I fail, nothing changes. Ayana replies, we all die tomorrow anyway. But if I succeed, she doesn't finish the sentence, but every person around the fire understands what hangs in the balance. The chance, however slim, that love might triumph over hatred, that understanding might overcome fear, that one young woman's courage might save two peoples from destroying each other. Go then, Manuelito says, his voice breaking slightly on the words, go with my blessing and the prayers of all our people, and may the spirits guide your steps and guard your heart. As Ayana slips away into the darkness, carrying nothing but her grandmother's blessing and the desperate hope that James Morrison is the man she believes him to be, she doesn't know that he is already riding toward their meeting place, driven by the same impossible hope that love might prove stronger than the machinery of war. The cottonwood tree stands silhouetted against the star-filled sky like a monument to persistence in a harsh land, its roots reaching deep into hidden water, while its branches stretch upward toward impossible dreams. James arrives first, dismounting near the place where three arroyos converge and create a natural amphitheater carved from red stone and shaped by centuries of flash floods and patient wind. Dakota seems nervous, ears twitching at sounds too subtle for human perception, and James finds himself wondering if horses can sense the weight of moments that change the direction of history. He checks his pocket watch by moonlight, nearly midnight, with dawn and death only hours away. If Ayana doesn't come soon, he will have to ride back to the fort and pretend he never attempted this madness. But as the thought forms in his mind, he hears the soft whisper of moccasins on stone and turns to see her emerging from shadow like hope, taking physical form. She moves differently than during their first meeting, with the controlled tension of someone who knows she is walking toward either salvation or destruction. You came, she says simply, and James hears surprise and relief mingled in her voice. Did you think I wouldn't? Ayana looks at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face as if trying to read his soul. I hoped. But hope and certainty are different things. They stand facing each other across 10 feet of moonlit ground, and James feels the terrible weight of everything that divides them, nationality, race, culture, and the sworn oaths that should make this meeting impossible. Yet underneath all those barriers, he senses something else, a recognition that they are, fundamentally, two young people who refuse to accept that mass murder is the only solution to their people's differences. Your army plans to attack at dawn, Ayana says, and James realizes she isn't asking a question. Yes, I'm sorry, I wanted to warn you sooner, but there are children in our camp, she interrupts. Babies who have never seen a white man, boys and girls who know nothing of war except the fear in their mother's eyes. The words hit James like physical blows. He thinks of the artillery positions his father has ordered, the cavalry charges planned to cut off all escape routes, the standing orders to pursue any fleeing Apache until they are dead or captured. Ayana, I wish there was something I could do, but I'm only a lieutenant. My father commands the regiment, and he's convinced that, your father? Surprise flickers across her face. The colonel who leads the soldiers is your father. James nods miserably. Colonel William Morrison. He's a good man in his way, but he sees this war in terms of military necessity rather than people. Ayana finishes softly. Yes. She moves closer, close enough that James can see the silver threads her grandmother has woven into her hair for protection. close enough to smell the sage and sweet grass that clings to her clothing like blessings made tangible. Then perhaps the spirits have arranged this meeting for reasons neither of us understands, she says. I came here to ask you to carry a message to your father, to ask him to spare the children when your soldiers come. But if you are his son, he won't listen, James says quickly. Not to military advice from his youngest officer, and certainly not to pleas for mercy from people he considers enemies. But he might listen to his son speaking from the heart about what is right. James feels the crushing weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. Ayanna, you don't understand. My father has spent his entire career fighting Indians. He's convinced that the only solution is total victory, complete pacification. If I tried to argue for mercy, he'd probably have me arrested for treason. And if you say nothing, and children die tomorrow because of your silence, what will that do to your heart? The question hangs in the air between them, like a challenge and an invitation. James thinks about his father's expectations, his own career prospects, the comfortable certainty of a life lived within the boundaries that others have drawn. Then he thinks about small bodies lying broken in desert canyons, about the light going out of Ayanna's eyes, about spending the rest of his life knowing he could have spoken and chose silence instead. There might be another way, he says slowly, an idea forming that terrifies him with its audacity. What do you mean? James takes a breath that feels like stepping off the edge of the world. What if someone could arrange for the non-combatants to surrender before the battle begins? If your people could somehow indicate that the women and children want protection rather than war? Ayanna's eyes widen with understanding and something that might be hope. You would guarantee their safety. I would try. If they approached under a white flag, if they clearly indicated peaceful intentions, it would be harder for the army to justify attacking them. And the warriors? James feels his heart breaking as he answers. I don't know. The military mind sees armed resistance as something that must be crushed completely. But if the women and children were already safe, Ayanna nods slowly, understanding the terrible calculus he is describing. Perhaps our warriors would fight differently if they knew their families were protected. Perhaps they would even choose to surrender as well, if it meant their children would live. It's possible, James agrees, though privately he doubts that proud men like Chief Manuelito would ever surrender after a lifetime of freedom. But it would have to happen exactly right. The timing, the approach, everything. They spend the next hour working out details that feel both absurdly specific and impossibly fragile. Ayanna will return to her people and propose that the women and children approach the cavalry lines at dawn under a white flag made from her own wedding dress. James will position himself to receive them and will use his father's name to guarantee their temporary protection while arrangements are made. It's a plan that depends on 1,000 variables beyond their control: the willingness of Apache mothers to trust white soldiers with their children's lives, the restraint of cavalry officers trained to shoot first and ask questions later, the hope that military honor might triumph over military expedience when the moment of decision arrives. If this fails, Ayanna says as they prepare to part, if your soldiers fire on women carrying white flags, it won't, James says with more conviction than he feels. I won't let it. She looks at him with an expression that makes his heart pound against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. Why are you doing this? Why risk everything for people you barely know? James thinks about all the reasons he could give. Military honor, Christian duty, simple human decency. But in the end, he chooses honesty. Because the thought of losing you before I've had a chance to really know you is unbearable. The words hang in the air between them like a confession and a promise. Ayanna reaches out and touches his face gently, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a tenderness that makes his breath catch. If we both survive tomorrow, she says softly, perhaps we can discover what the spirits intended when they brought us together in that canyon. And if we don't, then we will have died trying to choose love over hatred. There are worse ways to leave this world. They part without another word, each riding toward an uncertain dawn, carrying the fragile hope that courage and love might prove stronger than the momentum of hatred and fear that has brought two peoples to the brink of mutual destruction. As James returns to Fort Davidson, he finds his father still awake, poring over maps and battle plans in the dim light of an oil lamp. Colonel Morrison looks up as his son enters, his weathered face showing the strain of commanding men who are about to risk their lives on his decisions. Couldn't sleep either, the older man asks. James sits down across from his father, looking at the face that has shaped his understanding of duty and honor since childhood. Father, I need to talk to you about tomorrow. having second thoughts about the attack. That's natural, son. Every good officer questions his decisions before battle. It's not the attack itself, James says carefully. It's the standing orders about non-combatants. Colonel Morrison's expression hardens slightly. James, we've discussed this. In Apache culture, women and children are often as dangerous as the warriors. We can't afford to let sentiment, what if they tried to surrender? What if they approached under a white flag? Son, you know as well as I do that the Apache don't. But if they did? James interrupts, his voice carrying an urgency that makes his father pause. If women and children approached our lines carrying white flags, what would our response be? Colonel Morrison studies his son's face with the sharp intelligence that has made him one of the Army's most successful field commanders. James, what aren't you telling me? James feels the moment crystallizing around him like ice forming on still water. Everything he has been taught about military discipline tells him to remain silent, to follow orders, to trust that his superiors understand the situation better than he does. But everything he has learned about conscience and courage during a moonlit conversation with an Apache woman tells him that some orders must be challenged, regardless of the cost. Father, he says slowly, what if I told you that there are children in that Apache camp who have never hurt anyone? What if I told you that their mothers would choose surrender over death if they believed their children would be safe? I'd tell you that you're being naive about the nature of our enemy. These people have been at war with civilization for, what if I told you I'd met one of them? James interrupts, what if I told you that an Apache woman saved Dakota's life, asked for nothing in return, and spoke to me about peace instead of war? The silence that follows feels like the pause between lightning and thunder. Colonel Morrison's face cycles through surprise, suspicion, and something that might be fear for his son's welfare. James, he says carefully, have you been in contact with the enemy? The question hangs in the air like a sword suspended over James's career and possibly his life. To answer honestly is to confess to actions that could be construed as treason. To lie is to abandon any hope of saving the innocents who will die in tomorrow's battle. I've been in contact with a human being, James says finally. Someone who chose mercy over vengeance, healing over harm. Someone who made me realize that maybe our enemies aren't as different from us as we've been told. Colonel Morrison stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor like a gunshot in the quiet room. He moves to the window and stares out at the pre-dawn darkness, his shoulders rigid with the tension of a man facing an impossible decision. Do you have any idea what you're asking me to do? He says without turning around. You want me to risk the lives of my soldiers on the word of an enemy combatant who may be trying to lure us into a trap. I want you to remember that we're supposed to be the civilized ones, James replies, that our mission is to protect innocent life, not destroy it. Colonel Morrison turns back to face his son, and James sees something in his father's eyes that he has never seen before: uncertainty, doubt, the terrible weight of command when right and wrong become tangled beyond easy recognition. If I give orders to accept surrendering non-combatants, the colonel says slowly, and if this turns out to be an Apache trick, men will die because I chose to trust your judgment over 30 years of military experience. And if you don't, and innocent children die because we were too afraid to show mercy, what will that do to your soul? The words seem to echo in the small room like stones dropped into a deep well. Father and son stare at each other across a chasm that has nothing to do with age or rank and everything to do with the fundamental question of what they are willing to sacrifice in order to win a war. Finally, Colonel Morrison speaks, his voice heavy with the weight of command and the terrible burden of choosing between competing loyalties. I'll pass word to the company commanders that any non-combatants approaching under a clear flag of surrender are to be taken into protective custody, pending evaluation of their status. He pauses, his eyes fixing on his son's face with laser intensity. But James, if this goes wrong, if men die because I trusted your judgment about the character of our enemies, I'll hold you personally responsible. I understand, sir. And if you've been compromised by your contact with this Apache woman, if you're being manipulated into endangering your fellow soldiers, Father, James interrupts gently, sometimes the greatest courage is the willingness to trust in the better angels of human nature, even when everything around us argues for cynicism and fear. Colonel Morrison looks at his son for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time the man James has become rather than the boy he once was. You realize that if this works, if we manage to end this conflict without massive bloodshed, it will change everything about how we conduct frontier warfare. Maybe that's not a bad thing, and if it fails, James thinks about Ayanna riding through the darkness toward her people, carrying a message of hope that might save lives or might lead to disaster. He thinks about children sleeping peacefully in hidden canyons, unaware that their fate hangs in the balance of decisions being made by strangers in the pre-dawn darkness. If it fails, he says quietly, at least we'll have tried to choose mercy over vengeance. At least we'll know that when the moment came to decide between fear and love, we chose love. As dawn breaks over the mountains and two armies prepare for what everyone expects to be a day of blood and death, neither James nor Ayanna knows that their desperate gamble has already begun to change the hearts of people who thought they were too old and too wise to believe in the possibility of peace. The eastern sky bleeds pink and gold as Ayanna returns to the hidden canyon, where her people have spent the night in prayer and preparation for what most believe will be their final day on Earth. She finds her father standing watch at the canyon's rim, his weathered face set in lines of resignation and quiet courage. "Did you find him?" Manuelito asks without preamble. "Yes." Ayanna sits beside her father on the stone ledge, looking out over the vast desert landscape that has been home to their people for countless generations. "He will try to help, but he is only one man, and armies have momentum that individual soldiers cannot stop," her father finishes. He suggests that the women and children approach the cavalry lines under a white flag. If they surrender before the battle begins, his father might spare them. Manuelito is quiet for so long that Ayanna begins to wonder if he has rejected the idea without bothering to respond. When he finally speaks, his voice carries the weight of a leader who has exhausted all other options, and the warriors would fight differently if they knew their families were safe. Perhaps some would choose to live for their children rather than die for their pride. Her father's smile is sad and knowing. "You are asking me to gamble everything on the honor of a man I have never met, daughter. To trust that white soldiers will show mercy to Apache women and children when they have shown precious little mercy to our people in the past. I am asking you to trust that not all white men are the same, just as this soldier learned that not all Apache are bloodthirsty savages." Manuelito looks at his daughter, this fierce, intelligent young woman who has inherited her grandmother's healing gifts and her grandfather's strategic mind, and realizes that somewhere in the terrible mathematics of war, she may have found the only equation that leads to survival rather than destruction. "Call the women," he says finally. "Let them hear this proposal and decide for themselves whether they will trust their children's lives to the promises of strangers." The gathering that follows is unlike any in the history of their band. Women who have never been asked to vote on matters of war and peace find themselves holding the fate of their entire people in their weathered, work-hardened hands. Mothers clutch sleeping babies while grandmothers speak of the changing times that require new kinds of courage. Maria, whose husband died in the same raid that killed Ayanna's brother, speaks first. "How do we know these soldiers will not simply take our children as prisoners to be sent away to the white man's schools where they forget their language and their people?" It's a fear that haunts every Apache parent, the knowledge that the U.S. government has been systematically removing Native children from their families and placing them in distant schools designed to kill the Indian and save the man. "We don't know," Ayanna admits, "but we know what will happen if we do nothing. Our children will die today along with all of us, and they will never have the chance to grow up and remember who they were." Elena, the youngest mother in the group, holds her infant son close to her chest as she speaks. "At least if they live, even as prisoners, there is hope that someday they might return to us." Death leaves no room for hope. One by one, the women speak their fears and their desperate hopes. Some argue for staying together as families, choosing to live or die as one people. Others insist that any chance to save the children, no matter how small, must be taken. Finally, Ayanna's grandmother speaks from the litter where the younger women have carried her to this crucial gathering. "In my dreams last night, I saw two eagles flying together, one white, one brown. They circled each other warily at first, but when the storm came they flew side by side and both survived the lightning." The old woman's words carry the weight of spiritual authority, and the group falls silent as she continues. "Perhaps the spirits have sent us this young soldier as they once sent the white buffalo to our ancestors, as a sign that change comes not always through destruction, but sometimes through the courage to trust in unexpected places." When the vote is taken, it is unanimous. The women and children will approach the cavalry lines at dawn, carrying white flags made from wedding dresses and christening gowns, trusting their lives to the honor of strangers and the hope that love might prove stronger than the momentum of hatred. As the first light of dawn touches the canyon walls, Ayana helps dress the children in their finest clothes, not the practical buckskins of everyday life, but the beaded and fringed garments reserved for ceremonies and celebrations. If they are to surrender their freedom, they will do so with dignity and beauty, showing the world that Apache people know how to face destiny with courage and grace. Her own wedding dress, carefully preserved for the day she would marry a warrior worthy of her father's approval, becomes the flag she will carry as she leads this desperate procession toward an uncertain fate. The white deerskin, decorated with blue and silver beadwork that catches the early light like captured stars, transforms from a symbol of future joy into a banner of present hope. "Are you afraid?" asks little Chenoa, the 6-year-old daughter of one of her father's war leaders. Ayana kneels to look into the child's dark eyes, eyes that trust completely in the adults around her to keep her safe in a world that has suddenly become dangerous beyond her understanding. "Yes," Ayana admits, "but sometimes being afraid and being brave are the same thing. Will the white soldiers hurt us?" "I don't think so. I think they are people like us who love their children and want to do what is right." Chenoa considers this with the serious expression that children wear when they are trying to understand adult complexities. Will we see our fathers again? It's the question that breaks Ayana's heart, because she doesn't know the answer. If this desperate gamble succeeds, if the women and children are granted safe passage, it may be at the cost of the warriors who stay behind to face an army that will show them no mercy. "I hope so," she says finally. "We must hope so." As the small procession forms at the canyon mouth, 23 women and children dressed in their finest clothes, carrying white flags and the desperate prayers of their people, Ayana looks back one last time at the hidden village where she has spent her entire life. Her father stands at the canyon's rim, no longer the feared war chief, but simply a man watching his daughter walk toward either salvation or destruction. Their eyes meet across the distance, and she sees in his face all the love and pride and desperate hope that words could never express. "Go with the spirits, daughter," he calls softly. "And remember that whatever happens, you carry our love with you." As the small group begins the long walk toward the distant cavalry lines, Ayana thinks about the conversation that brought her to this moment, a wounded horse in a hidden canyon. Gentle hands and careful words, the recognition that their enemies might be capable of mercy if someone had the courage to ask for it. Behind them, Apache warriors prepare for what may be their final battle. Ahead of them, cavalry soldiers prepare to either accept surrender from their enemies or cut them down where they stand. And somewhere in the distance between those two possibilities lies the narrow path that Ayana and James have tried to create, a path that requires both peoples to choose trust over fear, hope over hatred, love over the terrible momentum of war. The morning sun climbs higher into a sky that seems to hold its breath, waiting to see whether this day will end in massacre or miracle, whether two young people's faith in each other will prove strong enough to stop armies that have already committed themselves to mutual destruction. James sits astride Dakota at the edge of the cavalry formation, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the white flags that will either vindicate his faith in Ayana or prove him a fool who has endangered his fellow soldiers for the sake of a romantic dream. Around him, 3 companies of seasoned cavalry troops wait in perfect formation, their weapons ready and their faces set in the hard lines of men prepared to do terrible work in service of their country. Colonel Morrison rides the line, making final adjustments to positions and offering quiet words of encouragement to soldiers who will soon be asked to charge into Apache strongholds where death waits behind every rock and tree. When he reaches his son's position, he reins in his horse and speaks in a voice only James can hear. "Are you certain about this intelligence regarding surrendering non-combatants?" James looks into his father's eyes and sees not just a commanding officer questioning a subordinate's judgment, but a father hoping his son has not made a mistake that will cost lives. "As certain as I can be, sir. Because once we begin accepting surrenders, word will spread to other Apache bands. This could change the entire nature of our relationship with hostile tribes. Maybe that's not a bad thing." Colonel Morrison studies his son's face, seeing there a conviction that reminds him of his own younger self. The idealistic lieutenant who once believed that military force could be used for justice rather than just victory. "There," James says suddenly, pointing toward a distant ridge. Movement. Through his field glasses, Colonel Morrison can make out a small group of figures descending from the hidden canyons where intelligence reports have placed the main Apache camp. Even at this distance, the white objects they carry are clearly visible against the red rock landscape. "Dear God," the colonel breathes. "They're actually doing it." James feels his heart hammering against his ribs as he watches Ayanna lead the small procession toward their lines. Even through the glasses, he can recognize her graceful movement, the way she holds herself with quiet dignity despite the terrible risk she is taking. "Sir," calls Captain Williams from his position with the forward scouts, "do you want us to advance and intercept?" "Negative," Colonel Morrison replies firmly. "Hold position, and let them approach. Pass word down the line that no one fires unless I give a direct order." The next 20 minutes feel like 20 hours as the small group of Apache women and children slowly crosses the open ground between the armies. James can see individual faces now, young mothers clutching babies, elderly grandmothers walking with painful determination, children whose eyes are wide with fear but who trust the adults around them to keep them safe. At 50 yards, Ayanna calls out in clear English, "We come in peace, we ask for protection for our children." Colonel Morrison rides forward alone, his hands clearly visible and away from his weapons. When he reaches speaking distance, he dismounts and removes his hat in a gesture of respect that surprises everyone, including himself. "I am Colonel Morrison," he says formally. "I understand you wish to surrender." Ayanna steps forward, the white flag made from her wedding dress flowing in the morning breeze like hope given physical form. "I am Ayanna, daughter of Chief Manuelito. We bring you our children and ask that you protect them from the war that comes." James watches his father's face as he looks at the group of women and children, really looks at them perhaps for the first time seeing Apache people as individuals rather than military obstacles. The colonel's eyes linger on the babies, on the grandmother who leans heavily on a walking stick, on the little girl who hides behind her mother's skirts while peeking out with curious eyes. "Where are your warriors?" Colonel Morrison asks. "They prepare to defend our home," Ayanna replies honestly. "But they fight differently now, knowing their families are safe in your protection. And you trust us to honor that protection." Ayanna looks directly into the colonel's eyes, and James sees her choose to gamble everything on the hope that this gruff military man might be capable of mercy. "Your son saved my wounded horse when he could have let it die. He spoke to me of honor and showed me kindness when I was his enemy. I trust that the father who raised such a son might also choose mercy over vengeance." The words hit Colonel Morrison like a physical blow. He turns to look at James, understanding for the first time the full implications of his son's earlier confession. His son has not just been in contact with the enemy, he has been the catalyst for this unprecedented moment of trust between two peoples who have known only war. "James," he says quietly, "did you arrange this?" "I suggested it might be possible," James admits. "But the courage to attempt it was theirs alone." Colonel Morrison looks again at the small group of Apache women and children, then at his own soldiers, who are watching this unprecedented scene with expressions ranging from confusion to admiration. He thinks about the reports he will have to write, the questions his superiors will ask, the precedent this moment might set for future conflicts. Then he thinks about his own grandchildren back in Virginia, and what he would want some distant commander to do if they were standing here with white flags, trusting their lives to the mercy of strangers. "Sergeant Martinez," he calls to his chief scout, "escort these people to the supply wagons and see that they're given food and water. Post guards for their protection, not their detention." "Yes, sir." "And the warriors in the canyon?" Colonel Morrison looks toward the hidden strongholds where Apache fighters wait for news of their family's fate. "Send a messenger under a white flag. Tell Chief Manuelito that his daughter and the other non-combatants are under our protection, and that we're prepared to discuss terms for a general surrender." Captain Williams spurs his horse forward, his face red with indignation. "Sir, you can't be serious. These people are enemies of the United States. We have orders to pacify this territory completely." "Captain," Colonel Morrison replies in a voice that carries the absolute authority of command, "we also have orders to act with honor and to protect innocent life when possible. These women and children pose no military threat, and they have surrendered voluntarily. We will treat them accordingly." As the Apache women and children are escorted toward the safety of the army camp, Ayanna looks back one last time toward James, who sits motionless on his horse watching this impossible scene unfold. Their eyes meet across the distance, and she sees in his face the same wonder and relief that she feels in her own heart. They have done something that neither of their peoples thought possible. They have stopped an army with nothing but courage and the fragile hope that their enemies might be capable of mercy. Whether this moment will lead to lasting peace or merely postpone the inevitable bloodshed remains to be seen, but for now, children who were destined to die today are safe, and two young people have proven that love can sometimes triumph over the terrible momentum of hatred and fear. The messenger returns from Chief Manuelito's canyon 2 hours later, with news that changes everything. The Apache war chief requests a formal parley to discuss terms for a general surrender, contingent on guarantees that his people will be treated with dignity and that families will not be separated. As James helps translate between his father and the Apache delegation that arrives under a white flag, he realizes that he and Ayana have done more than save lives. They have opened a door to a different kind of future, one where understanding might replace conquest, and where the children of enemies might grow up to be friends. The negotiations that follow are complex and sometimes heated, involving questions of land rights, reservation boundaries, and the fate of warriors who have participated in raids against white settlements. But through it all, the presence of the protected women and children serves as a reminder that behind every political decision are real people whose lives hang in the balance. 3 days later, when the final agreements are signed and the Apache band agrees to relocate to a reservation in exchange for protection and the promise that families will remain together, Ayana and James finally have a chance to speak privately about what they have accomplished. They meet again at the cottonwood tree where their desperate plan was born, but this time they come not as enemies seeking an impossible peace, but as partners who have proven that courage and love can sometimes change the direction of history. "Your grandmother was right about the eagles," James says, as they sit together beneath the ancient tree, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "She usually is," Ayana replies with a smile that transforms her entire face. She says the spirits have a sense of humor, that they enjoy surprising people who think they know how the world works. James takes her hand, feeling the calluses that speak of a life spent working with plants and animals, creating rather than destroying. "What happens now? With us, I mean." Ayana is quiet for a long moment, considering futures that seemed impossible just a week ago. "I don't know. Your people and mine will be watching everything we do, looking for signs that this peace can work. If we, what? If we choose to be together, we become symbols of whether two peoples can truly learn to live as one. That's a heavy burden to carry." James thinks about the challenges they will face, the suspicion of their respective communities, the cultural differences that will require patience and understanding to bridge, the simple logistics of building a life together when everything they have been taught argues against it. "Maybe being symbols isn't such a bad thing," he says finally. "Maybe the world needs to see that love is stronger than fear, that people from different worlds can choose to build something new together rather than destroying what came before." Ayana looks at him with eyes that hold all the wisdom of her grandmother and all the hope of her own young heart. "Are you asking me to marry you, James Morrison? I'm asking you to help me build a bridge between our peoples, starting with our own hearts. If that includes marriage." "It does," she says simply. And James feels his world rearrange itself around this moment of perfect possibility. They sit together as the stars emerge in the darkening sky, two young people who have chosen love over fear and hope over hatred, who have proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon against war is the courage to trust in the better angels of human nature. In the distance, Apache children sleep safely under army blankets, while their fathers discuss the terms of a peace that no one thought possible. Cavalry soldiers share their rations with former enemies and discover that Apache women tell the same kinds of stories to their children that white mothers tell to theirs. And at the center of it all, a wounded horse grazes peacefully in a hidden canyon, bearing the scars of violence but also the gentle touch of healing hands, a living reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of mercy can change the direction of destiny itself. 6 months later, James and Ayana stand together before a mixed congregation of Apache and Anglo witnesses, speaking vows that promise not just personal commitment to each other, but dedication to the harder work of building understanding between their peoples. The ceremony blends traditions from both cultures, creating something new and beautiful from elements that were once thought incompatible. Colonel Morrison, who has become an unexpected advocate for progressive Indian policies, walks Ayana down the aisle in the absence of her father, who died peacefully in his sleep on the reservation, having lived long enough to see his daughter safely settled and his people protected. Chief Manuelito's last words, spoken to his daughter on the evening before his death, become the final benediction for this story of love triumphing over hatred. "You chose to plant flowers in ground that everyone said would grow only sorrow. Now look what has bloomed." As James and Ayana begin their married life as teachers on the reservation, working to bridge the educational gap between Apache children and the larger world they must navigate, They carry with them the knowledge that their love story has become something larger than themselves, proof that the human capacity for understanding and mercy can overcome even the deepest prejudices and fears. Their children, when they come, will grow up in a world where the idea of Apache and Anglo cooperation is not a miracle but a simple fact of life, where the ability to speak multiple languages and understand different cultures is seen as a gift rather than a betrayal. And sometimes, when the evening light falls just right across the desert landscape, you can still see James and Ayana riding together toward the cottonwood tree, where their impossible love first took root, their horses moving in easy harmony across ground that once echoed with the thunder of war, but now knows only the gentle rhythm of two hearts that chose to beat as one. The story of the Apache chief's son who fell for the cavalry officer's daughter becomes the story of the Apache chief's daughter who fell for the cavalry officer's son, and in choosing love over war, they opened a door to a future that neither of their peoples had dared to imagine. This is the story we need to remember in our own time, when division seems stronger than unity, and when the voices calling for understanding are often drowned out by those demanding conquest. It reminds us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, the choice to see our enemies as human beings, to extend mercy when vengeance seems justified, and to plant seeds of hope in ground that has been watered with too many tears. In a world that often seems bent on destruction, the story of James and Ayana whispers a different possibility, that courage and compassion can change the direction of history, that bridges can be built across even the deepest divides, and that sometimes the greatest victory is achieved not through conquest, but through the revolutionary act of choosing to trust in the better angels of human nature. Their love story belongs to all of us, a reminder that in every generation, in every conflict, there are people who refuse to accept that hatred is stronger than hope, who believe that understanding is possible even when everything around them argues for despair. And if you found yourself moved by this tale of love transcending the boundaries that others thought unbreachable, if you felt your own heart stirring with the possibility that peace might be more than just a dream, then perhaps you'll choose to carry this message forward into your own communities and relationships. Because the truth that James and Ayana discovered in a hidden canyon more than a century ago remains as powerful today as it was then, that love given the chance will always choose healing over harm, hope over fear, and the future over the past. And that, ultimately, is the greatest victory of all.